Well, I will start with the intro items here as a few more people are logging on. So welcome to our April Business of All Protein seminar. Today, we're going to dive into consumer taste preferences in plant-based meat. We have the amazing Caroline Cotto with us from Food System Innovations, and she's going to be sharing all about the latest NECTAR 2025 Taste of the Industry report. For those that don't know me, my name is Pat McCauley. I am the Startup Innovation Lead here at the Good Food Institute. I serve as the main contact for startups and entrepreneurs. So if you are an entrepreneur, all protein founder, or startup interested in any of GFI's resources, please do reach out. A few things before I hand it off to Caroline. First, for those that are new to the work of the Good Food Institute, we are an international nonprofit organization focused on developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We identify solutions, mobilize resources and talent, and empower partners across the food system to make alternative proteins affordable, accessible, and delicious. So in short, we envision a world where alternative proteins are no longer alternative. Second, we record the webinar. If you follow our YouTube channel, you can find it posted there. We'll also email out a recording to everybody after. And lastly, we encourage everybody on here today to please do ask questions as we go. And we'll try to get to them at the end. We have about 15 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. Please do put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat, just so we can sort through them and hopefully get to everybody's question. So with that, I want to introduce Caroline Cotto. Caroline is the Director of Food System Innovations, or a director at Food System Innovation, where she leads NECTAR, an initiative accelerating the protein transition with taste. By conducting large-scale sensory panels of alternative protein products and operationalizing resulting data, NECTAR aims to create category-level value and empower stakeholders to make sensory-informed decisions. Prior to FSI, Caroline co-founded Renewal Mill, an award-winning upcycled food startup. She also served as an inaugural board president of the Upcycled Food Association, which is the world's first trade association for upcycled brands. She regularly mentors food tech and circular economy startups. She studied at Georgetown University and served as a Fulbright Fellow. She has been named to both Forbes 30 Under 30 and the 50 Next list. So truly the one and only Caroline Cotto. And also joining us later on in the presentation will be Tom Gonger. Tom is a software and product lead at Palette Insights. He comes from a background in VC-backed startups in the legal tech space. So we have an awesome presentation coming. Caroline, welcome. We're super excited to have you back again this year, and I will let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Pat. I'm super excited to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. So we have about the next hour together, and here's the agenda. We're going to briefly reintroduce NECTAR. Then we're going to explore some of the key takeaways from our 2025 report. Then Tom's going to help me show you how you can actually use this data for your own work. And finally, we're going to save some time at the end for questions. So please, as Pat said, drop those into the Q&A function throughout the call. And we'll also be using the poll function. So if you see something pop up on your screen, please play along and put your answers into that, and we'll make this a fun tax day. Again, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Pat. Just a brief note, I joined FSI last May to lead NECTAR, and this is the first report that I've led end to end. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of the changes from last year's study, but really excited to share with you all what we found. Just to formally kind of reintroduce NECTAR, we launched, as I mentioned, back in June of 2024. out of the thesis that the biggest barrier to repeat purchase for plant-based meat is poor taste. So essentially, a number of products launched during the pandemic that were not quite ready for mainstream adoption. And we know that many consumers tried these products, had a negative taste experience, and are now not revisiting the category because these bad first impressions are extremely hard to reverse. So we saw this clearly reflected in the market with the weakening demand for plant-based meat products headed into 2024. And over the last few years, we've seen the shuttering of numerous plant-based brands in the space. Thus, we launched NECTAR because we saw that there was no objective, publicly available, scientifically rigorous way to evaluate how plant-based products actually taste. And because taste is a primary driver of consumer purchasing, understanding taste is critically important to the success of this industry. So NECTAR exists to democratize access to sensory information and to bring an objective evidence base to taste. We're a nonprofit programmatic initiative of the climate philanthropy Food System Innovations. And our goal, as Pat said, is to empower stakeholders across the value chain to make more sensory informed decisions. We're doing this through 3 operational pillars. So we learn by conducting large-scale blind sensory panels of alternative protein products, starting with plant-based meat. We operationalize this data to provide brands with an R&D roadmap to improve their products and to launch new ones. And lastly, when we find great tasting products, we celebrate them to drive greater awareness and broader market adoption. So to date, NECTAR has conducted 3 sensory panels. Our first report, Taste of the Industry 2024, was published last June and looked at 45 plant-based meat products across 5 categories. In September, we published the first sensory report on balanced protein or blended meat products. And lastly, our latest report looked at 122 plant-based meat products across 14 categories, and 43 of those products were from Europe. So for the remainder of our time today, we're going to be doing a deep dive on NECTAR's Taste of the Industry 2025, which is the largest publicly available sensory analysis of plant-based meats. So NECTAR has a few core methodological tenets that we've stuck to across all of our research. So namely, all of our work is done as blind taste tests, so participants don't know if they're eating animal-based or plant-based products when they try them. We also only test with omnivore consumers, that does include flexitarians, and we always use animal benchmarks, which we select by looking at the highest volume selling animal product in a given category, according to American retail sales data. We use a diverse participant pool split evenly across age, gender, and education level. And lastly, protecting brands is really important to us. So we use the term plant-based average and plant-based leader in our work. So the plant-based average is the averaged performance of all the plant-based products we test in a given category. And the plant-based leader is the product in each category with the highest overall liking score. So as I mentioned, there were a few differences between our 2024 and our 2025 methodologies. Our 2024 test was a central location test, or CLT, done in a sensory lab in Chicago, and the products were purchased off of retail shelves in the Chicagoland area. So brands didn't know they were being tested. For 2025, we brought participants into a restaurant setting to give them a more natural experience while still maintaining high levels of control. And these tests were conducted in either New York City or San Francisco. And we also reached out to brands to participate in the study, which meant that we could include European products and food service products as well. We did maintain high levels of control, so all samples were blinded and served one at a time in a randomized order to participants. All products were seasoned and prepared according to manufacturer instructions after controlling for equipment type, and we used food service equipment like the grill you see here. All products were served in a full build. So for a hot dog, that was in a bun, and for breaded chicken, that was in a sandwich. And each product was tried by 100 omnivores who regularly eat the product category of animal meat. So here's just a quick overview of the products we tested, the animal benchmarks that were used, the dishes that the products were served in, and the total number of products that we tested by category. And you can find this all in our report, which we will send out after the call today as well. So we're now going to walk through 5 of the key findings from the report, but we're going to make it a little bit more interesting with some polls. So here is our first poll today. Which plant-based category had the lowest average liking in this year's Taste of the Industry report? And for those of you who attended last year's presentation, it's a hint that it is not the same as 2024. Ooh, some good guesses here. Okay, it looks like people think steak. We'll go ahead and close that poll out. Okay, so I think people voted steak, but the correct answer, close second with guesses, is actually bacon. So if you look at the top of the screen, you can see that bacon only had 19% promoters and 50% detractors, meaning that half of the people who tried plant-based bacon disliked it in some regard. So if we average all of the data on this slide, we can get a sense of where the plant-based meat industry as a whole stands from a taste perspective today. And when we do this, what we see is that the average plant-based product is generally disliked. So in fact, plant-based products were disliked more frequently than they were liked, with 35% of participants rating the plant-based products some form of dislike, compared to just 30% of participants that rated them some form of like. The 68% of promoters for the animal products makes it very clear that there are still large gaps in liking between plant-based meat and animal-based meat. We even found that there are some categories where large gaps exist between the leading plant-based product and the animal benchmark. So this lack of strong leader product really indicates that these are particularly challenging categories where it is very difficult to replicate animal meat. So you guys said steak, which was, very close to bacon and being one of the hardest categories to replicate. And the challenges that we're seeing with these categories exist across manufacturers, ingredient types, and processing techniques. Or said differently, no one has really cracked the code in these categories, which signals the need for both more upstream innovation and indicates that there's still white space for leader products to emerge in these categories. And this leads us to our first big takeaway from the report, which is that most plant-based products still need significant R&D in order to be ready for mainstream adoption by omnivore consumers. So it's time for another poll. This time we're asking which category of plant-based meat had the biggest gap in liking between the leading and the average plant-based product. And I'll give you a hint that it's not bacon. Some good guesses. Seeing a lot of people thinking burgers. Okay, unbreaded chicken is pulling ahead. We'll go ahead and close that poll. Awesome. And the correct answer is actually meatball, which was surprising to everyone here. So congrats to those 10 people that guessed meatball. If we look at the mean liking scores for the plant-based average versus the plant-based leader in the meatball category, we see that there's a 1.3 point difference between them, which was actually the largest gap in this year's test. So while meatballs might have had the largest gap, you can see that across many categories, a leader product really started to pull away. And the fact that the leader products were generally liked by 50% of participants versus just 28% for the average product indicates to us that improvement is feasible. We also noticed that flavor seemed to provide the biggest opportunity for leading products to differentiate themselves. So categories with bolder flavors had bigger gaps in liking between the average product and the leading plant-based product. We also noticed that there are actually no chicken products listed here, which indicates to us that chicken is farther along as a category and more R&D is needed in beef and pork relative to chicken. To illustrate this a bit more, we can look specifically at hot dogs. So in 2024, hot dogs were the worst performing category in the Taste of the Industry test. So the orange dot here represents the overall liking score of the plant-based leader in the 2024 test, and the brown dot represents the animal-based benchmark. However, if we look at the 2025 data, we can see that a new product entered the market that was not tested in 2024, and that product has a much closer overall liking score to the animal benchmark. This data gives us hope that new products are entering the market that better align with omnivore consumers' taste expectations, and these products are really differentiating themselves, again, primarily on flavor. This year, NECTAR also introduced the Tasty Awards for the first time, which is a consumer-facing awards program based on the Taste of the Industry sensory panel data. So the way that we determined winners was by setting a top performance threshold, and that threshold was of the people that tried the product, at least 50% of them had to rate the plant-based product the same or better than the animal product in overall liking. So you can see this represented here on this histogram of preference, where 28% of people rated the Impossible chicken breast the same as the Purdue chicken breast by indicating that they had no preference between these two products. And then 32% of people actually preferred the Impossible chicken breast. So when we add those two percentages together, we get 60%, and this product was considered a winner. Out of the 122 products that we tested, 20 products met this performance threshold and were named Tasty Award winners. So we're not going to go through all of them today, but you can use this link on the NECTAR website to explore each product as well as unique recipes made with each of these products. And this leads us to our second big takeaway from the report, which is that leader products have emerged in most categories and that those leader products are ready for mainstream adoption. Interestingly, however, we found that some categories had multiple winning products, while other categories, specifically those more challenging categories we talked about earlier, like steak and bacon, had no winning products. So it's time for another poll. What do you think were the top 2 performing categories in this year's study? Looks like nuggets and burgers, or nuggets and breaded chicken fillets. Give people a few more seconds here. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, so it looks like people felt like nuggets were going to be in the top 2 categories, which is a strong guess, but the answer is actually unbreaded chicken fillet and burgers. So congrats to those who guessed correctly. This was actually really surprising to us, but each of these categories had 5 Tasty Award winners. So in the 5 categories listed here, you can see that at least 40% of participants rated the plant-based products the same or better than the animal-based products. And for burgers and nuggets, for burgers and unbreaded chicken fillet, it's almost 50% of participants. So again, this is really impressive because we're no longer looking at individual products. We're looking at categories as a whole. So to have half of the people trying burgers and unbreaded chicken fillets rating the average plant-based product the same or better than their animal counterparts is a very positive sign. This year, NECTAR also defined what we meant or what we mean by taste parity. So essentially, as we've defined it, it's equal likelihood that the plant-based and the animal-based products would be preferred on a future test with no statistically significant difference between those two numbers. So while no products in this year's test achieved taste parity or outright beat the animal products, we did find 4 products where the animal product failed to achieve statistically significant preference over the plant-based product. So this is fairly nuanced. I definitely recommend checking out page 13 in the report for further detail. But we did see this as a really positive sign and led to our third takeaway, which is that taste parity is achievable. So again, while no products in this year's test actually achieved taste parity, further improvement to the top performing products could result in parity, and we expect that taste parity will be achieved in the 2026 test. Those 4 products that were on the path to parity include 2 chicken nuggets, 1 burger, and 1 unbreaded chicken breast. So you may be wondering, okay, 4 products are on the path to parity, but does taste parity actually matter? And our short answer is yes. When we started to overlay NECTAR's sensory data with sales data, we see that on average, better tasting categories capture 10 times greater market share than lower performing categories. And the categories that were only rated the same or better than the animal product by 25% of participants or less capture less than 1% of the market. So we just looked at the category level, but I'm curious, on average, how much more market share do you think that leading products capture over average ones? Oh, actually, this is the wrong question, but we will. This is our next question. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end that for now. Okay, here's the correct one. Okay, looks like people think 24%. Okay, strong guesses for 24%. The answer is actually 50%. So congrats to those who answered 50%. We found that the plant-based leader products on average captured 1.5 times more sales than the other plant-based products. So, or in short, better tasting products sell more than their plant-based competitors. And if we look specifically at the meatball category for a moment, we see that for every 5% increase in the percentage of consumers rating the products the same or better than the animal benchmark in overall liking, market share also increases by 5%, which is equivalent to $1.4 million per year. We also found a similar effect in chicken nuggets, and that increase was about $2.1 million per year. Interestingly, in meatballs, we also found that taste appears to outweigh price, with better tasting meatballs outperforming worse tasting meatballs, despite being more expensive. Obviously, there are a lot of confounding variables here, but this led us to our next big takeaway from the report, which is that investment in R&D has strong financial returns. So there's real ROI when companies ensure that their products taste good and validate those claims externally with omnivore consumers. Okay, so we've come to our final poll this morning, which you guys got a sneak peek of, but curious if you think the interior or exterior color is a bigger opportunity to improve the overall appearance of plant-based meat. Ooh, it's a tight race. Okay, slight edging out for interior color. And that is actually correct. So the correct answer for color is interior color. And here we've used penalty analysis to summarize the top opportunities for plant-based products. So at a high level, flavor is the top opportunity because plant-based products are described as having a weird aftertaste or an off flavor 5 to 6 times more often than their animal counterparts. But texture is a close second, with plant-based products being described as juicy 62% less often than their animal counterparts. This leads us to our final takeaway from the report, which is that the path to taste parity will require improvements to flavor, texture, and appearance. Obviously, the roadmap for each category looks a little different, and NECTAR has all of the data available on our website for each category. But if we look across all plant-based products in the study, we've summarized the key R&D opportunities across flavor, texture, and appearance here, which are for flavor, increasing savoriness while reducing off flavors and bad aftertastes. For texture, increasing juiciness and tenderness while reducing mushiness. And for appearance, improving all around color and searing. So with that, that's just a small taste of the data available in the full Taste of the Industry 2025 report, which you can access via nectar.org, and which we'll also be sending out after today's call. But I'm now going to turn it over to Tom Conger from Palate Insights, which is the sensory firm that NECTAR worked with to conduct this study, to walk you through the publicly available data dashboard that we've built to accompany this year's Taste of the Industry report. So Tom, take it away.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much. All right, can everyone see? Oh, looks like you can see my camera. Caroline, could you stop sharing quickly? Perfect. Can everyone see my screen all right? Sounds good. So you might end up on this landing page where we have all the data from the 2025 Taste of the Industry, and you'll be able to see the 14 different categories that we examined. But for today, I think we're going to focus on hot dogs, which was one of the categories that Caroline mentioned earlier. So by selecting hot dogs from the menu, we can actually go right to the study, and then we can see all of the pages that are available, or we can just click Explore the Data to head right in. So on every page, there are going to be some options to control the visualizations that appear. Namely, you can choose which products you're examining by changing the product and benchmark options, but then you can also navigate between pages using the sidebar on the left. So on the product snapshot page, one of the things that you can do is compare product performance at a glance. So you can see there are a number of different attributes that we examined for hot dogs, and the mean liking scores for these two different products on this line graph right here. And so when we're looking at the plant-based average and the animal-based product, you can see that on overall liking, there's a pretty big gap. And then there are also gaps on flavor, texture, and appearance. And then as we change the plant-based average to the plant-based leader, you can see that this actually shrinks quite significantly across a number of different modalities. Now, as we're thinking about how to actually improve product performance for a particular product, saying that you want to improve flavor or texture or appearance, or all of them at the same time is great, but you might need to make a decision at some point about what you want to choose to put first. And so by starting on the product snapshot page, you can quickly get an idea of where the biggest gaps are. And so if you look at the data, you'll actually see that texture has some of the biggest gap between the plant-based leader and the animal-based product. And then we can see the breakdown of the different ratings by group. So you can see that the plant-based leader has 48% promoters on texture versus 65% promoters for the animal-based product. So we think texture is potentially an area we want to look at. So we can go to the preference testing page, and now we can get an idea of how significant the difference between the animal-based product and the plant-based leader actually is. So as we scroll down on this page, we'll go from overall liking, where we can see there's a statistically significant difference. And then we'll see texture, where we see there's another statistically significant difference. So on this page, as you're interpreting the graph, one of the things you might see is that to the left, there'll be a strong plant-based leader preference, and to the right, there'll be a strong animal-based product preference. And if you adjust this page at all, although in this case, we're only looking at direct comparisons, these are the only two options that are available, you'll see these change just a little bit. And then we can see in some categories, there might be more or less statistical significance. So between the plant-based leader and the animal-based product, the difference on flavor is actually only directional, whereas the difference on texture is actually statistically significant. And I think that's really worth exploring and considering. So as we go to the sensory analysis page to think about this a little bit more, and we compare the plant-based leader against the animal-based product, we can see on flavor that good aftertaste would be a high impact recommendation. But if we actually look at texture, we can see that the impacts of changes that we recommend here are actually a little bit higher. And as we scroll down to look at the comparative kata analysis, we'll see that there's a much higher net prevalence and a much higher impact on liking for these traits on texture compared to flavor. And these graphs are relative. And then as we scroll down, we can see a simple kata analysis graph. This one is not based on net prevalence. And then finally, we can just see the prevalence here. So we have this idea that texture is fairly important, and we're getting a better understanding of what actually is driving the differences. But maybe we want to look at some qualitative data just to get a really good idea. So we can go to the qualitative page, we can select the plant-based leader, and in this case, we want to look at the dislikes as opposed to the likes to see if texture actually is something that's really important. And then we can see that in the summary that the texture is criticized, that it feels a little mushy or lacking in firmness. And then as we scroll down, you can see that texture is a significantly mentioned item. And as we look at the dislikes, that it does actually bias towards negative sentiment. As we go towards likes, we can see that flavor is something that actually stands out here. And when we compare this with the plant-based average, we can see that there are slightly different ratios, which I think is somewhat interesting to look at. So there's a ton of data and a ton of opportunities to explore it. There are also a demographic analysis page. You can see if there are particular areas where a given product has higher liking than others, for instance, by age or by education or any of the other demographic attributes we examine. And then there's also the population reach page where you can get an idea of who the people in the study actually are. You can see the survey summary where there are breakdowns by question. And then finally, you can also look at the raw data and you can download it directly via CSV. And with that, I can hand it back to you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Tom. Okay. So yeah, we will share again this out after today's call, but you can go in, you can look at all of the data that Tom just showed you by category and really dive deep into there. Just very briefly, I want to give you a quick overview of how NECTAR is operationalizing this data ourselves. So first and foremost, we work directly with brands to share data with them and support their R&D, sales, and marketing teams. Secondly, we're partnering with a wide array of academics on different projects. So two examples are we're using the NECTAR data to train a large language model that will ingest our sensory data and output specific benchtop experiments to try to speed up the R&D process. So sort of like a food scientist's best friend. Another researcher is comparing our sensory data on texture with mechanical analysis on texture to see where differences emerge when evaluating the same products. And lastly, as I mentioned, this year we launched the Tasty Awards. So on March 12th, we held a 150-person awards ceremony in San Francisco, where we featured all of the winning products in unique dishes. And we presented trophies to the 20 award winners with the goal of bringing some celebration back to the alternative protein industry after a really challenging few years. So we wanted to showcase how delicious plant-based meat products can be when in the hands of talented chefs and give people an opportunity to try them firsthand. So we plan to do this again next year, so stay tuned for more information. Okay, so finally, we're about to head into Q&A, so please get your questions ready and add them to the Q&A box if you haven't already. But just wanted to end by saying NECTAR is still just getting started, and we're eager to hear from the industry more broadly on how we can support you all. So these are a few of the questions we're kicking around. Specifically, should we focus future testing on new regions or new categories? Or what are some of the creative ways that, oh, 1 second, I'm getting a note that my screen is not sharing. 1 second, sorry about that. Okay. Can you see that?
I can't see your screen right now.
Okay, let's see. Sorry. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, apologies. So very briefly, these are some of the ways that we're operationalizing the data. This was our Tasty Awards event in March. And yeah, these are some of the questions that we're kicking around. Specifically, should our future testing sort of focus on new regions or new categories? Or what are some of the creative ways that we might be able to use our existing data sets to answer novel questions? So if you have any ideas on this, we'd really love to hear from you. Please feel free to email me at caroline@nectar.org or submit your ideas on our website. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Q&A. So again, please drop your questions into the Q&A box, and I'll ask Pat from GFI to help us facilitate some of those questions.
Thank you very much, Caroline and Tom. That's awesome. I love the dashboard and giving that. We put that link to the dashboard in the chat for those listening and looking to visit the dashboard yourselves. So feel free to keep adding questions into the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can here. And to start us off, the first one that came in, why did you use like a complete dish in the sensory assessment as opposed to just the product alone?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is definitely something that Palette has done a lot of research on, and we've seen that you can still see really significant differences between the products, but that serving the product in a full build gives a much more authentic, natural experience for consumers. It's much more akin to how they would use the product at home versus serving them sort of like a naked quarter of a burger patty on a plate. And so we feel that we can still see differences between the products, but get more accurate information about the product as a whole.
Awesome, thank you. Next, weren't nuggets the top performing category last year? What do you think changed this year?
Yeah, great question. They were the top performing category. As I mentioned, we did make some methodological changes. But what I really think happened here is actually that the nugget product we were using was the animal nugget was reformulated. So we saw that they sort of use different packaging. I think they've made some tweaks to that product. So yeah, I think there is a little bit of the animal nugget improving. The plant-based nuggets kind of still performing strongly. We had 2 winners in that category. We were really surprised that unbreaded chicken was actually the one of outperformed sort of the chicken nuggets. But yeah, I think it all comes down to sort of that particular day of testing. And for the chicken nuggets this year, we've had some strong performers, but I think the animal nugget was a little bit stronger.
Awesome. I'm going to combine 2 questions here because they overlap a bit. How do you select brands that you use in the study, and how can brands participate that haven't participated?
Yeah, so we created a framework which is available on our website. So we're looking, we choose categories by looking at sort of categories that have sufficient development of plant-based product and are high volume in terms of sort of the amount of animal lives lost and just in terms of overall retail sales. Then within each category, we're looking for an array of brands that represent sort of both big and small brands, regional differences, differences in ingredient type or production method. And then we reach out to the brands to see if they want to participate and provide product for the sampling. So we're always open to meeting new brands. If you're a brand and you want to have your products tested, please reach out to us directly. We do our own sort of landscape analysis to see which products are on the market and make sure that we're getting a good breadth of different product types. But yeah, we are always looking for new entrants, and it is free to participate besides just providing the product samples. So.
Awesome. And on that same thread, were the same brands tested in 2024 versus 2025? And were there any new brands that contributed to improvement in any areas?
Yeah, so some of the same brands were tested. Some of the same brands launched new products, which were also tested. And definitely new products were tested that contributed to some of the improvements. So I think that hot dog example that we talked about is really important. That was a new entrant to the category. This was also, as I mentioned, the first time that we included European products in the test. And there are definitely some European companies using different techniques that American companies are not using. So it was interesting to see how those products performed. It was actually really interesting to see as well that when we looked at the overall performance of European products versus the overall performance of American products with American consumers, there was really no difference. So that said to us that a lot of these European products would be ready for launch in the US, or that they'll resonate the same with American consumers as they are with European consumers.
Thank you. When it comes to displacement of animal products, do we have evidence that better tasting products are indeed displacing animal products to a greater extent than ones that ranked lower on the taste scale?
Displacement is always tricky. So I think we're seeing that better tasting products are capturing greater market share. And presumably that is taking market share away from the animal products. But overall, we're seeing that sort of investment in R&D is really worthwhile to gain market share within the plant-based category itself and to start competing more with the animal products. Taste is really a huge driver, and if it's sort of table stakes for being able to increase sales in the market.
Awesome. This one is, I guess, a little outside of the report, but NECTAR related. What surprised you most about building NECTAR over the last year and a half?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's been all pun intended, there's been a real hunger for this type of information. I think we at NECTAR really believe in sort of like radical transparency. So sharing sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly about where the category is today. And I think people are really open to that. They want sort of that transparent look at and a sort of sobering reality of where we are today and where we need to go and how to get there. I think I've been a little surprised at what brands are finding most helpful. And I would love to hear from brands directly, but I think we started this with the thesis that brands needed sensory data to help them improve their products. And I think what we're finding is that actually some of the benefits of being a Tasty Award winner, some of the marketing and sales benefits are a little bit more attractive to brands than actually the sensory data because they are doing a lot of this work themselves. So that's been surprising to me, but I think we're continuing to sort of figure out who has the highest need for this type of sensory data and how we can help them best operationalize it. And that looks like talking to different stakeholders across the supply chain, like investors, retail buyers, food service buyers, to see how they're making decisions today and how we can share our research with them.
Thank you. Can you share more information on the preference test and the sensory test? Can you share what sensory test was used or a score sheet or anything like that, or more details on it?
Yeah, maybe I can bring Tom back to talk a little bit about the preference testing versus the sensory analysis tab.
Yeah, awesome. You still there, Tom?
I'm still here. Yeah, so on preference testing, we use what's called a Wilcoxon test. It's a statistical significance test to compare just the direct performance and the direct difference in liking between two products. Whereas on the sensory analysis page, we're looking across selection rates on what are called kata questions to see what attributes are more associated with the higher performing products and what attributes are more associated with the lower performing products and the implications that result. So they're slightly different tests. I don't know if that adequately answers your question, but I'm happy to answer a follow-up as well if I can.
Yeah, and I would just add, so for overall sensory testing, we're sort of asking about flavor, texture, and appearance via a survey tool, and then mapping the impact of those different attributes on liking, which is what you'll see in the sensory analysis section of the digital dashboard. On the preference testing, we've taken an individual's response to a plant-based product and an individual's response to the animal-based product and subtracted them to get the difference. And that's what you're seeing on that histogram of preference. So you can really see how people are responding to different products in the same test.
Awesome. Are there any plans to build similar tools for alt dairy products and/or include cultivated meat in future reports?
I love this question. So we're actually thinking about, as I said, we're seeking input on how to scale NECTAR for the next year. We are highly considering doing dairy, so things like butter, milk, cheese, all of that sort of stuff. So if that's of interest, we'd love to hear from you all on that. Cultivated meat, I think, is something we'd love to test in the future, but a bit more challenging just because of which products actually have FDA approval and are out in the market. We do currently only test products that are fully commercialized, so no benchtop products. So once more of those products become approved and are really out in the market, I think we can start doing some of the cultivated testing as well.
Fantastic. Why did you choose the city you did for the testing, and do you plan on doing testing in other cities in the future? And a follow-up to that, did you include any Canadian products?
Great questions. So as I mentioned, in 2024, the test was conducted in Chicago. This test was conducted in New York City and San Francisco, just because that's where we sort of have capacity and folks on the ground. I think we also wanted to kind of use a consumer base that might be a little bit more open to plant-based products, but we are considering testing in Ohio to get more sort of a central Midwestern look at some of these products. We did not include any Canadian products to my knowledge, but if they are distributed in the US, they were included. I think actually maybe one of the brands is technically based in Canada and distributes heavily in the US, but we are open to including more Canadian products in the future.
Then
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, really quickly, I was just going to say Palette has done testing to make sure that regardless of what location that we use, the results would end up replicating. This is something we've studied internally.
Awesome. Okay, a couple more here. We're getting close to time, so we'll only do a few more. We'll try to get to as many as we can quickly. If brands are doing this testing themselves, have you gotten any insight into how liked, unliked products are before they're going to market, and how much that aligns with your findings?
So the question is sort of, what is the differential between internal testing and NECTAR's testing? Is that
Correct.
yeah. So we're actually trying to measure this right now with Palette's help to sort of see. Anecdotally, we see that the scores for internal testing are often much higher than the scores for third-party testing that NECTAR does with omnivores. So we're really trying to quantify exactly what that is, but it does seem that brands internally, the data is a little bit biased. So if you give it to a bunch of friends, or you're like doing this testing in a grocery store setting and you ask them, what do you think of this product? It's pretty unlikely that people are going to give you bad feedback directly. But even when it's blinded internally, we do see that there is some sort of bias, maybe just because those folks are trying the product more often. So we think there's a really strong case for testing your products externally with an objective third party like NECTAR, but more to come soon on how much we are able to quantify that difference.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to kind of combine two of these on the next question here. Opinion questions. Could you share your opinion on blended meat and in adding cultivated into plant-based products? Do you think that these could solve some of the issues we have around taste and texture?
Yeah, so overall, I think balanced protein or blended products makes a very compelling case. So as I mentioned, we actually did a sensory study on this that we published in the fall and found that in the burger and the nugget categories, there were actually multiple products that outperformed the 100% animal products in taste, which was not the case in the plant-based study as we discussed today. So I think there's a very strong case to be made for balanced proteins on the market and for using animal meat sort of as a flavoring additive versus some of the more traditional additives being used in plant-based meat today. So we think about it kind of like the hybrid car as a way that we can sort of transition people more towards plant-based eating with this hybrid solution, especially starting in food service. So I personally and FSI are very bullish on this category. I have a colleague named Tim Dale who works on this exclusively and has done a lot of consumer insights work to see how best to introduce these products to the market and socialize them with consumers. And sorry, what was the second part of the question, Pat?
It was combining blending cultivated with plant-based.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a compelling case for that as well. So we see sort of like step one is using animal meat to flavor plant-based products and create these balanced proteins. Eventually, you could potentially switch that animal meat for cultivated meat so that no animals are being harmed in the process, and then ideally switch to just plant-based adoption at the end. So hopefully, as I said, more of these cultivated products will get approved for the market. We've had some exciting news with Mission Barns this year, and then we'll see more balanced proteins on the market that are using cultivated as that source of animal protein.
Thank you very much. All right, two quick ones to wrap us up here. So based on this year's report, if someone out there is a startup or they're in the process of starting a plant-based brand, what's the takeaway from this year's report that maybe was different from last year's report?
Sorry, can you hear me? The main takeaway, I think, is that sensory testing is still really important. So if you're starting out, make sure that you're doing sensory testing on your product before you bring it to market. I think last year's study showed a real preference for breaded products, like chicken nuggets and chicken tenders. And I think in this year's study, we found that there were some categories that were unbreaded that were still performing really highly. And again, across ingredient types, across production methods. So I think it just really hits home for me that sensory testing to understand how close you're coming to that animal product is really important, regardless of sort of what inputs you're putting into your product. And that breading might not be sort of the easy fix for everything, that there are still really great tasting products that are unbreaded as well.
Thank you. And lastly, what are you working on next at NECTAR?
Yeah, we have some exciting things. So as I mentioned, we're building a large language model using our data sets. So once that's publicly available, we're hoping that more food scientists in the community will use it and give us feedback on that. We're also working with GFI to do a sensory study in Singapore on balanced proteins specific to the Asia Pacific region. So we'll be publishing that work this fall. And then we are already going to start thinking about Taste of the Industry 2026. And as I mentioned, we're exploring some new categories like dairy potentially. So if anybody has strong feelings on what would be really helpful, we would love to hear that as we sort of make those decisions and start recruiting brands in the next few months.
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. This was awesome. Thank you, Tom. We really appreciate your time and all the insights. To wrap up here, as a reminder, the seminar was recorded. You will be emailed a copy. If you missed it, you'll be emailed a copy as well. We also posted on our YouTube channel. As GFI continues to drive progress in this space, we encourage you to share your ideas and feedback with us. You can email us directly at corporate@gfi.org. Or reach out to myself or any of the GFI staff at any time. Thank you all so much for attending. It was awesome to have such a global audience on here. Tom and Caroline, thank you again. And thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening or morning or wherever you are in the world. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.